Hello. Today we are going to talk about the mental illness, mental wellness, or mental health, and a little bit about the history of psychiatry. Okay, first of all, what is mental health? So you will hear the words mental illness and mental health, and they are two different things. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It's important in every stage of our life from childhood, adolescence through adulthood. Okay, so you would say how is your mental health right now? Okay? You wouldn't say how so it's basically how are you feeling in your brain, right? How you handle stress, how you relate to others, how you make choices. What is mental illness? Mental illnesses are health conditions involving changes in emotion, thinking, or behavior. So changing to our mental health. Our mental health changes, and sometimes we can get sick, just like our bodies get sick, and you can get better, right? There are ups and downs in our brains and our bodies. So mental illnesses are associated sometimes with distress, but are always involved in functioning with social, work, or family activities. Okay, so it's basically like you're sick in your brain. Something that's I think a really helpful way to think about mental illness is that we are always on this continuum. Okay, so you're not either ill or healthy. We are always kind of going back and forth on this continuum, and depending on what's happening in our lives, we'll be at all different places along the line. Sometimes we're amazingly healthy, sometimes we're feeling pretty sick. Sometimes we're just in the middle. We could kind of go either way. Who decides what classifies as a mental illness? So the difference between a mental illness and the daily ups and downs of human emotion. Okay, so this is a really big difference. Sometimes we can be sad. Sometimes we can say, oh, I feel so depressed today, but you are not necessarily actually depressed. And this is a really important thing to distinguish with our language. That saying, I'm depressed, doesn't actually mean you have depression. Okay, so the really big difference and something you need to understand is that mental illness affects your ability to function in your regular activities. So your sleep is disrupted, your eating is disrupted, your relationships, your work, your ability to go to school. You can be sad and not mentally ill. Okay, so you can be very sad for 5 days and still not mentally ill. Who decides what these mental illnesses are? There are a few ways, but in North America, basically the Bible, there's kind of like a Bible of mental disorders, and a group of world-renowned psychiatrists come up with these definitions. And here it is. If we were at school right now, I would bring this into class and we could flip through this. It's called the DSM-5, which stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and it's version 5. Okay, that's what the 5 is. And I just put a quote in there from the American Psychiatric Association describing the DSM-5. If we flipped through the DSM-5, we would see 300, I think, different mental disorders and descriptions of them, and they all disrupt daily life. Okay, remember that's a very important part of the definition. And here is a video I'd like you to watch. It's 10 minutes. This lesson might take you 2 days because there are a bunch of videos, but they're really important to watch. I want you to look at these websites and just kind of flip through them. You don't need to read every word of every one. And they are talking about the treatment of the mentally ill throughout history. And if you went on the CAMH trip, you would have learned some of this already. Okay, so just flip through those. Types of mental illnesses. So I was right, there are nearly 300 mental disorders listed in the DSM-5, and the main groups are, and this is according to the DSM-5, okay, the main groups are mood disorders, anxiety disorders, personality disorders, psychotic disorders, eating disorders, trauma-related disorders. So these are things that would come directly from an experience. substance abuse disorders, and obsessive compulsive disorders. The diagnosis of mental illness can be controversial. There have been many debates in the medical community about what is and what isn't a mental illness, and they always change. Okay, so something that was a mental illness, for example, like homosexuality 80 years ago, is not considered a mental illness anymore. And that's a really important thing to know. I've gone over some of the main types of mental illness here, and you can read about them and you can watch a video explaining each one of them. So I've gone over anxiety disorders, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorders, and all of these videos are really interesting. Mood disorders, psychotic disorders, and personality disorders, and that's all I've done. So you can read about each one of these and watch the associated videos, and they will help you decide what you want to look at for your project. Okay, thanks very much for listening.